No episode last week because my editor Ryan was in Guatemala. Ryan, I know whatever you have is better than anything I could hope to put in this first segment, so take over the screen with 20-30 seconds of Guatemala.
Todd, thank you. I promise you I will not disappoint.
Art is never a solo sport. And I bring that up because I think we get confused, right? Because we look at our artists and how artists are branded and marketed, and they are branded as one guy. Like you have Steve Jobs, he was just one super guy. Or like if you look back in the past, you have your Picasso, Beethoven, Mozart, and you're looking at just a one guy, a one man show, right? Or a one woman show. And I think it's funny because we look at these people and tend to assume that they did it all by themselves, but that's never the case. Like when we look back in the history of art, back through the Renaissance and the Baroque all the way up to modern, you've got all of these different styles and things always emerge as eras, right? We're looking as eras of art history. And why does that happen? It's not because one person just decided this was the way things should be. No, it's because a group of people fed off of each other and created this incredible community. And now it feels like a great time to talk about that because artists are more isolated than ever, and there's this temptation to draw into our shell and not need anybody else. But I want to encourage you today and remind you that there's only so far your creativity can go if you're doing it by yourself. Even Steve Jobs had another Steve to bounce ideas off of, right? So this week, whenever you're going about your business, if you're tending to hide in your shell, get it out instead. J.R.R. Tolkien had C.S. Lewis, and I need you to find your somebody or somebodies who you can get with, who you can communicate with your art about, and who you can make better stuff with. Before I get into this week's question of the week, I gotta give a quick shout out to my dog who just silently sat in the corner all morning while I was working and writing, and now when I've decided to film, thinks it's a good time to incessantly bark around our... No, see, your realism. Eyes, right? Well, that's not really... So shout out to dogs in that respect. This week's question of the week comes from Scott Shannon. And Scott asked, how do you effectively market when you have a low or no budget? So the first thing I want to do is show you this picture right here. Actually, a couple of images of how I did things a while ago. This one is me recording a video, and this one is me recording my audiobook. And the best advice I can give you or anyone at all whenever you're starting to market your first thing, money's not an excuse. You do what you can with what you have. And that's true at every stage of the game. Like if you have $10, squeeze the most marketing you can out of that $10. If you have $100,000, you still want to get the most out of that money too. So I would encourage you to kind of break out of the money thing. I think number one, tactically, the best thing you can do if you have no money is to make relationships. Right? It costs $0 to reach out and start to connect with similar people who talk about what you talk about. And then later down the line, whenever you're releasing a product, whenever you're releasing a book or whatever it may be, get them to help you sell it. I think that's the single best way to do things for free is to leverage those relationships. And that's more of a long-term payoff than trying to grab some kind of cheap Facebook ad or something like that. So I would say if you want to market it effectively, it goes back to the theme of the show. Involve other people in what you've got going on. I'm I'm looking down like, did I have this unbuttoned the whole time? I don't want you guys to think like something is happening here. This week's artist spotlight goes on Francisco Goya, who is a late Spanish painter of the late 18th century. And I kind of stumble across his work in a really roundabout way. My wife and I are watching all of the Best Picture winners, and we watched 12 Years a Slave, which is a really, really hard movie to get through. And some of these scenes, I'm like, where did the director like come up with a vision for this? And I'm looking through the history, and I'm gonna flash up some work from Francisco right now. I'm looking through the history, and it turns out that much of Francisco's work influenced how they put together this movie, and he just focused on suffering. And he was so good, they said he was so good at showing suffering because he didn't make it easier to look at with any grit or putting something off to the side. He was like, here, look at this. This was bad. And that's exactly what 12 Years a Slave was. I obviously recommend that movie if you haven't watched it yet, and to go back and look at how some of the artists, and especially Francisco in this case, influenced films throughout the time, because I'm finding all these little connections and it gets better every week. That does it for this week's episode of Finish Friday. Before you go, answer this week's Ask the Audience. And it's a little personal here, so I'm going to have to ask you to confess a little bit with me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how supported do you feel in your art? 1 is I get no support ever. 10 is I have a great community and feel completely confident in what I do. Love to know you guys' thoughts on that. I will, of course, respond at least for the first 24 hours. I'll get back to you. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button if you like this show. Once again, I'm Todd B from Tennessee, and I will talk with you next week.